realidades de un pasado menos largo de lo que algunos quisiéramos, porque vamos a hablar de las genealogías de los estudios críticos de la improvisación
And, well, of course, theory follows the practice. So until we didn't have a practice, there could not be theory, there could not be any analysis. But it could have been good to have a little bit more analysis and more theory. But understanding the current theory we have available is relevant to understand where it comes from, to understand the perspective it brings to the table. Of course, the Guelph Institute has had an important role, a quite relevant role, and it's logical that those who will be speaking in this panel about the genealogies are the representatives of this institution. So, of course, that from 17 Institute, there's a lot of joy and satisfaction to have you all here in this panel. So I will present the four of you. First, we have Ajay Heble, who has been for a long time the director, and he has fulfilled and more than he will leave this position next month. Daniel Fischlin, Ellen Waterman. She's in charge of the journal. I don't know if that's the best word, but yeah, it's a journal. Although it's not per se a journal as it's supposed to be. And, well, it has a collection of texts in English, some texts also in French, a little less than what we would expect on a bilingual country. But there are some authors that speak French that decide to publish in English, even though they speak French. Even though the colonialism and post-colonialism criticism is present. And Jashen, who is currently studying in the University of Guelph. And he is particularly present here to give a perspective that sometimes we are missing. Sometimes we forget, or sometimes professors get together and make their investigations, their research, and students are like there right behind. And I think it's particularly good to include someone who is a student. I wouldn't say studying itself, because I think all of you are still studying just as scholars and artists in general. We're always studying. So I will give the floor to Ajay. And then I don't know which one of you we will see, I guess. And the first part will be closer. I mean, and maybe 10 minutes each of you. Jashen will be closing the panel. And afterwards, we will be seeing how much you would like to interact or exchange ideas, or if you want to expand on what the other one has mentioned. We will check if we can open the conversation so the rest of you can also improvise some good questions. Ajay. Bueno, gracias Wade y gracias a todos por estar acá. Hablando de genealogías, pues preparé algunas palabras para rastrear los estudios, ¿no? Y este espacio.
My team at the International Institute
for Critical Studies in Improvisation hosted Improvising Communities, a retrospective exhibition meant to trace the emergence of a new field of interdisciplinary scholarly inquiry. The exhibition sought to mark a significant milestone in the development of the field. The founding of the International Institute for Critical Studies and Improvisation, or ICE, at the University of Guelph was facilitated by a Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council partnership grant, which we received in 2012. The partnership grant and a previous large-scale multi-year partnership-based grant in 2007 for a predecessor project called Improvisation, Community, and Social Practice set in motion over 15 years of robust research and creative outputs generated by a team of scholars, many of whom are here with us today, researchers, community partners, and arts practitioners on a local, national, and international scale. The exhibition sought to document and illustrate the development and formalization of critical studies in improvisation as a field of academic inquiry, and to narrate how ICE, that is our institute, evolved into a central source for the collection and dissemination of research on the social implications of improvised artistic practices. When visitors entered the exhibition space, they were greeted by a series of panels showing a timeline of events and activities that led to the emergence of the field. And I have a slide that maybe we can show. It's just the timeline. And that timeline has actually been translated into Spanish. And where can people see that? On the editorial portal of 17, it translated into Spanish. Yes. Yeah. Can you make it big? Yeah. There we go. So you can see that this traces the evolution of the work we've done at the Institute from 1994 up until the current period. And this is what visitors at the exhibit were greeted with when they walked into the exhibition. As an exhibit, Improvising Communities invited viewers to explore, inquire, investigate, and play with a curated selection of sample projects that were generated by ICE's network during this extended period. These included practice-based community programming and accessible new media technologies. The exhibit encouraged visitors to consider one of the central research questions that interested us, and that is, can improvisation be a vehicle for positive social change? As we prepared for the exhibit, which was to be a physical, in-person exhibition, we started to think about the ways in which the exhibit could have a digital component. We approached our partners in India, Studio Oleomingus. They create video games. We approached our partners in India, Studio Oleomingus, about creating a video game that would showcase ICE's research findings. What would it look like, we wondered, to use a video game to showcase our research findings from the last 15 years? Enthusiastic and up for the task, Studio Oleomingus and ICE set to work to determine the format, the content, and the technical specifications of the game, meeting monthly with an advisory committee to talk through ideas, troubleshoot issues, and narrow in on a delightful, playful experience. The video game is available on our Institute's website. Studio Oleomingus explains the game is composed of tiny interactive pieces that you can find some delight in repairing and tinkering with. Each toy in the collection is a playing card that contains a variety of media, including audio tracks, documentaries, short films, photographs, recorded performances, artwork, and more, all from different research and creative outputs generated by team members at ICE and our network. As the timeline on the panels at our exhibit suggests, our story really begins with the Guelph Jazz Festival, a festival of avant-garde jazz and creative improvised music, for which I served as the founding artistic director. After starting the festival in 1994, I was inspired to organize an academic conference as part of the festival's regular schedule of events. So just a few years into the festival in 1996, we held our first edition of the Guelph Jazz Festival Colloquium, and it took off quickly and attracted attention from far and wide. The success of the colloquium led to the founding of our journal, Critical Studies in Improvisation, Études Critiques en Improvisation, which helped to form an extensive international network of people interested in the topic. The formalization of the field emerges largely out of these contexts and with the significant support of a series of large-scale, multi-year partnership grants from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, or SSHRC. SSHRC has been our biggest supporter. I mean, they've provided 15 years of multi-million-dollar funding for our work. During the first phase of our work, supported by that major collaborative research initiatives grant, 2007 to 2014, our team established critical studies in improvisation as a new, vibrant, interdisciplinary field of inquiry with the peer-reviewed journal that I mentioned a moment ago, Critical Studies in Improvisation, Études Critiques en Improvisation, which Ellen is going to tell you about in a moment, a series of annual international conferences that took place across a range of sites in Canada and elsewhere, and a book series with Duke University Press, which Daniel will talk about. In phase 2, supported by a partnership grant from 2013 to 2021, our team established and formalized a multi-site partnered research institute, the International Institute for Critical Studies in Improvisation, or ICI, hosted at Guelph, but with partner sites across Canada and now internationally, including our friends here in Mexico City. It's the only institute of its kind specifically dedicated to studying improvisation. As part of this grant, we created a new graduate program in critical studies and improvisation. Daniel will tell you about that. And we started construction on a brand new research and performing arts facility, Improv Lab, which opened last year. Through these initial phases, we trained and mentored the equivalent of some 400 students and postdoctoral fellows across Canada. And one of our current postdocs, Jashen, is here with us today to talk about some of his experiences. We also held a series of summer institutes, which Ellen will talk about, over the years with graduate courses for students. And these took place before we actually had our graduate program. So these were summer institutes that kind of led to the formation of the graduate program. We placed many of our graduate students and postdoctoral fellows in tenure-track positions and related positions. We developed strong collaborative relationships with partners. We conducted hundreds of research projects that benefit local communities in Canada and around the world. We attracted thousands of international delegates to our events. We achieved worldwide influence and impact, as is evidenced by new programs, conferences, publications, and interest in improvisation across the globe. Now we're in phase 3 of our work, supported by another multi-year partnership grant from SSHRC. In phase 3, we plan to investigate the next generation of guiding research questions that will expand the global impact, the disciplinary scope, and the reach of our field and the Institute. This work will be carried out through our already established sites at Guelph, McGill University in Montreal, University of Regina, Memorial University of Newfoundland in St. John's, and University of British Columbia in Vancouver, along with our new partner sites in Ottawa, Carleton University, here in Mexico City with 17, the Institute of Critical Studies, and in Belfast, Queen's University, Belfast, thus expanding the international scope of our sites. And we have researchers and partners from all around the globe. So in summary, phase 1 and 2 of our work allowed our expanding team to establish the infrastructure for the field of study and to prove its feasibility and its social value, with phase 1 establishing the field and phase 2 formalizing and institutionalizing it. Phase 3 will allow us to make the most of this infrastructure to conduct research widely across disciplines, fields, and borders, evaluating previously unquestioned ways in which improvisation can bring about demonstrable change. That's a very quick snapshot of a small part of the history of the work we've done together over the last 15 years in helping to shape this field of inquiry. The one final thing I ought to note before turning things over to my colleagues is that when we set out to do this work 15 years ago, improvisation was very much disparaged and looked at askance, whether in the context of pedagogy, arts funding policy, or support structures. Improvisation was often devalued and largely misunderstood. Part of our goal, especially in that first grant, during that first phase of our research, was to increase the legitimacy of this field of improvisation as an artistic and a social practice and as a field of scholarly inquiry. I think the success of that work is testament to a version of the humanities and improvisation's role in it that many might have dismissed or even scorned 15 years ago.
I'm going to not improvise. Many thanks to Benjamin, Ricardo, the teams at 17 and Fonoteca Nacional, and everyone at the International Institute for Critical Studies in Improvisation, who organized this thought-provoking and profoundly moving conference and festival. And I need to pause for a second and ask us to thank the most virtuosic improviser, the simultaneous translator, Ilsa, who has given us poor monolingual English speakers access. So I had written something before I came and I threw it out because as I prepared these remarks, I had yesterday's session on institution building in mind, as well as conversations with Benjamin, Wade, Ricardo, Juanita, and others. It's inspiring to hear your thoughtful process in developing critical improvisation studies in the ENG. My job today is to talk about the journal we founded at the University of Guelph in 2004, Critical Studies in Improvisation, Études Critiques en Improvisation. I'm not the current editor. I was one of the founding co-editors, and I was actively involved from 2004 to 2010. So my remarks today constitute a bit of a review from a certain distance, which I've very much enjoyed. In considering the 20-year legacy of the journal, I'm struck by the principles of creative collaboration, community building, interdisciplinarity, and interdependence that necessarily provide the foundation for the field. They are the same principles that weave the fabric of creative improvisation, both as artistic expression and as intellectual project. Creative collaboration suggests that we're listening deeply and responding with a willingness to hold space for difference, to make productive use of friction, as Juanita Delgado points out. And I think that the principle of dissensus is just as important as consensus. And here I'm riffing on the French political theorist Jacques Rancière, as cited in Dylan Robinson's brilliant book, Hungry Listening. In the context of anti-colonialism and indigenous resurgence, Robinson critiques hungry listening as extractive and urges us to foster a critical listening positionality. So following on this principle of collaboration, community building asks us to consider the parameters of our community, the permeability of our borders, to engage in critical self-reflection and keep a sharp eye out for who we might be excluding from the community, whose ideas and creativity we might be missing out on because they don't already fall within our worldview or values. In ICE, we have worked constantly on these processes of self-reflection and critical listening positionality, sometimes succeeding, often failing, always learning and growing. Interdisciplinarity is both foundational and perhaps the most significant strength of our project. If we want to consider improvisation as a social practice, then we need to consider not just the arts, but the arenas of everyday life: medicine, law, education, urban planning, culture, governance, business. And these have all been subjects explored through ICE and through our peer-reviewed academic journal. Interdependence is a word that I only learned a few years ago through critical disability studies, and not one that we consciously used in creating our project, to my knowledge, but I think it's key. We depend enormously on the resources that our institutions and government agencies have provided, though they come with all kinds of frustrating restrictions and require endless labor. We collaborate with and utterly depend on talented and dedicated staff, students, and fellow colleagues, academics and artists, who are working under uneven conditions like job security and rate of payment. For connectivity, we depend on the reliability of local and global technologies that none of us fully comprehends, right? Like open access via the internet. All this might seem obvious, but it's very easy to forget as we uphold ideals of equity and freedom in improvisation studies. So critical studies in improvisation, études critiques en improvisation, is an open source, which means anybody, you don't have to pay to see it, online, totally digital, peer-reviewed journal. So our articles go out for double-blind peer review. When we first set out to create the journal, there, as Ajay mentioned, there was no other journal devoted to improvisation as a social practice. Our explicit aim was to create a community around critical improvisation studies. In Canada and the US, open source online journals were relatively new, and we were able to take advantage of the University of Guelph Library's investment in the Open Journal Systems, or OJS software, which had been recently developed at Simon Fraser University in Canada. We were lucky. OJS is designed to support the workflow of a peer-reviewed journal, from submission through peer review, editing, copy editing, and publication. Very exciting to us was the fact that OJS supports audio and video content. From the start, our ability to build a community was based on interdependence. Our library support was crucial, both because they donated the server space and because they provided technical support. In fact, Wayne Johnston, our library technician who just retired, was a champion of the journal for 20 years. Without him, it would not have functioned. The OJS integrated workflow means that a smart undergraduate student can act as managing editor. And several colleagues, Ajay Heble, Frederica Royas, Daniel Fischlin, and myself, formed the initial editorial team, just adding this work to our regular workloads. We called on our international network of colleagues working on improvisation in diverse fields, from music and philosophy to literature and law and more, to form the editorial advisory board. All these attributes, institutional support and human networks, allowed us to conceive of critical studies in improvisation, études critiques en improvisation, as a kind of proof of concept, an online meeting place for a wide variety of approaches to improvisation as a social practice. The journal was thus a virtual extension of the discourse already developing through the Guelph Jazz Festival and Colloquium over the previous 8 years. It would make this discourse widely available, at least in the English-speaking world, wherever folks had adequate internet access, and also demonstrate the seriousness of our commitment to building a new field. And this was very helpful in gaining support from our institution and government funding bodies. From the beginning, the journal was a labor of love, constituting an interdisciplinary and international community for growing the field of critical studies in improvisation. To date, the journal has published 26 issues that feature 97 peer-reviewed articles, 43 notes and opinions pieces, 23 interviews, and 67 media reviews. We have more than 1,400 registered readers. We can track over 31,000 complete reads of articles and 1.6 million total views. Sustainability is a very real issue, and we've recently moved away from a very heavy reliance on grant funding to a publication partnership with the digital publisher Heble, which is providing some modest royalties from institutional libraries who are willing to pay to have open source journals in their systems. One of the things I like best about the journal is that it truly is a forum for creative collaboration. We publish scholarly articles, but equally value artist interviews and the section we call Notes and Opinions for a less formal style of exchange. This section has included contributions from major artist thinkers such as George Lewis and Pauline Oliveros. as well as emerging artist researchers. For example, in 2021, we published 3 issues on the topic of improvisation, musical communities, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Volume 14, a double issue, included 6 scholarly articles plus an outpouring of 24 essays, reflections, testimonies, interviews, and creative offerings reflecting on the ongoing impact of the pandemic. In a time when we were unable to meet in person, the journal was a forum that gathered examples of creativity and resilience to inspire and create hope. These contributions were from artists and researchers, ranging from senior scholars and artists to students. Volume 12, number 1, published in 2017, is a great example of the journal being a space for interdisciplinary and international activity in critical studies and improvisation. Entitled Just Improvisation, Enriching Law Through Musical Techniques, Discourses, and Pedagogies, it chronicles a project led by legal scholar Sarah Ramshaw and musician Paul Stapleton at Queen's University, Belfast. They asked how improvisational strategies emphasizing ethical dialogue might be used to train lawyers working in the realm of child protection law in Northern Ireland. My contribution to the special issue reflected on the conference Just Improvisation, which brought musicians and legal professionals together, and it demonstrates the benefits of interdisciplinary. So I'm going to quote briefly, and I'm very close to being finished. I wrote, I came to Just Improvisation thinking that our goal was to examine the ways that improvisers can inform child protection law. Critical studies in improvisation, after all, is a field that seeks to extrapolate from an aesthetic realm to a social realm, with the underlying premise that improvised music is meaningful, even potentially moral. What I came away with is the insight that those involved in child protection law are themselves practiced improvisers, in a field where the stakes are the lives, health, and welfare of children and women suffering from domestic abuse. If the virtues of active listening, responsiveness, engagement, reciprocity, adaptability, risk-taking, inclusiveness, and trust building can be found in musical improvisation, it is equally clear that those entrusted with seeking justice for society's most vulnerable people are employing skills of empathy, negotiating human relationships, and balancing current behavior against past behavior and future expectations, all within the strict constraints of a system of intricate rules and limited resources. The experience of those working in child protection law, I now feel, has much to offer those of us working in critical studies and improvisation. So over 20 years, critical studies and improvisation, Études Críticos en Improvisation, has fulfilled its initial role as a forum for many kinds of exchange in the field. But there is still lots of work to do. Now I think we need to better serve a truly international, diverse, and multilingual community, something that comes with many challenges. So when I say this, knowing that the people beside me are working really hard on the journal. My personal editorial role ended a long time ago, but I know that the current team is committed to these goals, including more robust French language content, thanks to the skills of Eric Billon. I also think we need to seriously consider issues of accessibility for people with disabilities, and we need to actively seek more content from the global south. As the journal ages, issues of technology and interdependence come to the fore. Some of the original video content, so important to archiving artistic practices, is no longer compatible. Finally, I'll just restate that the journal continues to be a labor of love. It only works to the extent that a community of people committed to critical studies and improvisation are willing to share their skills, ideas, and talents.
Thank you, Ellen. So my name is Daniel Fischlin. I'm the current on leave founding director of the graduate program in critical studies and improvisation. Our graduate program hosted at Guelph, founded at Guelph. and also a long-serving general editor of the Duke University Press series, Improvisation, Community, and Social Practice, which was an outcome or an output related to the very first grant that began this whole voyage. So I'm going to speak kind of randomly. Thank you for being so prepared, both of you. But I'm going to add a few things, and I'm very glad that Ellen mentioned love. I'm interested in genealogy in perhaps traditional terms or maybe non-institutional terms. I'm interested in the silences that we have to address when we think about genealogy. So I'm going to share a few thoughts on that. And I'm going to start with the title of the conference, which is it's an interesting conundrum, this title. Because it's a silence-producing machine. And of course, we're in the age where machines are, where AI is literally killing people as we speak in Gaza. We're associating the concept of improvisation institutionally with a form of, of becoming a machine. And I'm going to just say, or ask the question, how might we defeat a machine that consumes everything, including silence? And then we're back to the silence-producing machine improvisation, maybe as an answer. So this is a kind of loop that we think a lot about in the program with the graduate students that we have, who are keenly aware of the nature of institutionalization as a way of, or as a potential problem for a discipline associated with improvisation, which asks that we look beyond perhaps institutional ossification, institutional ways of thinking about things, to find our way to liberation, right? And that's an ongoing reality of the work that we do. So back to love. I see my genealogy, or my place in the genealogy of this project, coming out of respect, solidarity, profound friendship, long-term friendship with Ajay. In my mind, this my journey in this began through my friendship with Ajay, who was doing remarkable work programming the Jazz Festival, which truly was, and to this day, I think is one of the most unique festivals. I mean, especially consider in a small town in Ontario, not cosmopolitan, not a Toronto or a Mexico City or anything. And to have these remarkable year after year arrays of performers coming through with a kind of very clear ideological purpose, I think, in the way in which Ajay programmed, coming from his love of Black music and his knowledge about Black music and his desire to bring Black musicians who had all been, but been forgotten in the way in which jazz festivals are programmed, right? Where you go to a jazz festival and you're going to hear Robert Plant maybe, or some such, so what Ajay did was remarkable. It drew me in. And we were working in the English department at the University of Guelph as English professors, both coming from musical backgrounds. And then we decided, coming out of the work that Ajay was doing in the colloquium, associated with the festival, we did 2 books, The Other Side of Nowhere and Rebel Music. Again, explorations of the questions that were pertinent in terms of genealogies of where improvisation in our understanding at that point in time, where it came from, i.e. Black America, right? So, so when I think about my relationship, or when I think about telling the story of the genealogy of the project, and I'm so glad that both of you have done this very formal sort of exposition, I think about the affect of the relationship, not only of myself with Ajay, but with Ellen, other colleagues, with postdocs, and with the students in the program, and the ever-expanding network of people that we're coming to know, Benjamin, all the team here, and many more who I hope will join the network over time. So that's kind of my way in. And I want to be, I just want to offer the thought that when we think about genealogy, let's think too about the hidden aspects of where, like the affect, the hidden histories. And for me, that history is really important, although it's not something that you're going to tell the granting agency, right? So I wanted to share that with you for a reason. So I'll say a few words about the Duke University series. Many of them will, much of what I have to say will sort of resonate with what Ellen just told you about the journal. So part of the output, one of the major outputs for the first major grant that we won was to create a book series. And this was in the same spirit as the journal, which was to gather multiple voices, to not turn it into the usual boring academic careerist, star-making kind of process, but to genuinely find a community of people who could come together and platform multiple voices together in a book series with a prestigious press. We are initially, because Ajay and I had done our first book with Wesleyan University Press, a very well-established press in the States, we thought, well, we'll continue our work with Wesleyan. And I'm going to tell you a story about that gives you some sense of the struggles that we've encountered. So we had published a very well-received book with Wesleyan. We felt it reflected on our work, and they were interested. They took us on. They decided to go ahead with the series. And Ajay and myself and George Lipsitz co-wrote the Fierce Urgency of Now book and submitted it as the first book in that series to Wesleyan. And we got some very nasty reviews back about that book. And those reviews were coming out of conventional musicology. They're coming out of people who felt ideologically challenged by what we were doing. They were coming out of spaces in the American Academy that were deeply, profoundly corrupted, I think, by really conventional ways of thinking. And we had tried to destabilize all of that in the book to the best that we could. We knew we were taking a baby step. We had no delusions that we were going to do something. We were just trying to find the words from where we were coming from to articulate what we knew about what we were doing, with no notion that we would be here today, right? No notion that all those other things would eventually happen. Long and the short of it was that we co-decided to not pursue Wesleyan Press. The three of us decided, no, we're not going to pursue. We walked away, which cost us thereafter about 3 years of work to find another press. And we eventually ended up with Ken Wissaker at Duke University Press, a wonderful press. But we had to rewrite the prospectus for the entire series, 100+ page document. We had to go through multiple independent reviews. We had to go through a full board review by the board at the Duke University Press before finally we were accepted. And then the book itself had to go through 2 independent peer reviews and then a board review before it was accepted for publication. And that's the story of that book. So years of waiting and fighting it out at the administrative institutional level to see it through to publication. All the while it had been written, right? And we were waiting. So the series, the book series, has now published 5 books. There's 6 books intended for the series. Ellen is one of the contributing editors. We sought deliberately to bring together different interesting constellations of people who could reach out to their very unique networks, bring them together, and articulate specific kinds of foundational, again, steps towards an understanding and knowing with regard to specific topics. So in our case, it was with respect to social justice issues and improvisation. Ellen, it was with respect to subjectivity, issues of subjectivity or of identity. With others, one of the books, the last book I did with Eric Porter had to do with improvisation in the aftermath of crisis, because there are so many instances in which I mean, what we saw in Bolivia the other day is a grand example of how to improvise a response to a political crisis. So, so the series will terminate with the sixth book. And I'll just give you a little bit of insight into that, because we were improvising where we were going with the books. We had a sense of what people wanted to do, but we didn't know where we would end up. And the sixth book has been a problem, because the Duke University Press wants a capstone book, right? A book that situates the discipline. And it's very difficult to stably say this is an endpoint for an emergent field of study like this. And the place that I've ended up in working with Ken Wissaker, who's the director at Duke, has been to think about maybe a book that addresses the poetics of improvisation. So that returns us to the creative voices, that returns us to creative language about improvisation that disrupts academic cant, that disrupts the ways in which narratives around how the academy or how academics talk to each other get, again, kind of sedimented and ossified. So so that's the book series. And I want to be very clear, in no way did we think we were canon building in doing the series. We thought what we were doing was gathering voices that would provide some sort of an uplift for the next generation of people who are going to come along. And you're in an impossible situation, because you're producing, work that's getting major attention at the same time as you're deeply troubled by the way in which that work might get canonized too quickly, right? So, but yet you have to produce the work. So, so we're very much looking forward to the next generation, and as the comments about the Global South, the work that's going on at this conference, new voicings, new ways of seeing things, absolutely is what we're looking for in what's to come. Other thing to note is that the series unintentionally spawned sub-series. So Ajay, for example, has published recently a book on pedagogy and improvisation. I have a book forthcoming this next month on improvisation and pedagogy. So there was a subset of work on the pedagogy of improvisation, the improvisation of pedagogy that came out of that work. Similar thing around transcultural improvisation, because we started with our knowledge of Black American music, but it is, however ubiquitous improvisation may be as a global artistic and social practice, that does not mean that it is universal in the sense of sharing the same approaches and values. So, so Eric Porter and myself did a set of 3 projects that addressed transcultural ways of thinking about improvisation, just again as a little baby step to get toward the next phase of things. So that's so again, unintentional outcomes are very much one of the interesting things about how the project has worked. Onto the graduate program. Yeah. So very quickly, we have a graduate program primarily with doctoral students in it, 35 plus at this point. Founded in 2018, first student entered in 2018, 6 years of work to get it through, governmental approval, Senate approval at the university, not to mention just designing a program that is completely unique. The only graduate program in critical studies and improvisation anywhere. It was an intended output of, again, related to one of the SHIRT grants. And it was meant okay. It was meant to take some of the values and the ideas, transdisciplinarity, multiple voicings, and the learnings that we had along the way, and translate that into a program that people who were kind of like us, could. So when I talk about this program, I say it's a program for outliers. It's a program. It's a program that was developed for people who already have a practice. Virtually every student in the program has already an established artistic practice, and they come into the program because they're looking to leverage the good things that an institution can do into their practice, and we're looking to leverage their practice and the good things that extra institutional practices can bring into the institution. And I have to say, it's been a labor of love again to take these students in. To one of the wonderful things is that Ajay and I have traded off. I do a core concepts 1 year long course. Ajay then does a community facing course, completely about showing students that the theory and the practice are integrated. There's no separation. That research, artistic practice, pedagogy, there are no boundaries. They are integrated aspects of being, and that being who you are uplifts communities, and that understanding how to uplift a community is a really important civil function that improvisation is deeply connected to. And that, so we're not producing academics per se, we want to produce, such as a student is a product, right? We're looking to find people who can uplift the communities in which they participate. So that's very brief, and I'm very keen to talk to you more about that program.
So first of all, thank everyone for who's organized this conference, and thank you for the vision, Ajay. Thank you for the work, Daniel. Thank you for the work, Ellen, and the genealogy of almost like giving birth. Here's a postdoc student to sort of talk about how this resonates with me, how the work resonates with me. I have some slides that I wanted to share over the next 10 minutes. So. And I'll start just by, before the slide comes up, talking about genealogies and how I met. So I moved to Canada in 2017 from the United States to pursue a PhD at Western University in music education. And I ran across an article by George Lewis in the journal that was just spoken about. And I made a bookmark of that journal for my literature reviews as I got ready for my QAs. But something struck me about that journal as being very different from what I had been reading in the field of music education. And I started subscribing to the improv notes, and it said that they were not going to send, junk mail and things like that. So I'm like, okay, I can do this. And I got a note a few months later about this camp in Gaspésie, which I had never heard of, Mile Camp Music Improvisation at Land's End. It's about a 22-hour drive from my house in London, Ontario. I love road trips, and I was like, I'm going to sign up for that camp. I don't know what it's about, fully, but I'm going to take that drive. I just got a 2017 Subaru as a graduation gift to myself for my finishing the master's, and drove it to Canada from the States. And there is where I met these wonderful people at Mile Camp, and had just an amazing time of food, of swimming, of fires and campfires, and meeting just incredible people, seeing improvisers and dance. Poet was there as well. Ellen, you and your husband, Michael, came and did a workshop. And it just was like, I went back after that to my advisor at Western, and I said, all the stuff you're talking about in music education, they're actually doing it. We should really figure out how to do that, because that was really impressive to me. So part of my work as a postdoctoral fellow, I kept in contact with Ajay and the Institute and Daniel, and was given an opportunity to do a postdoc. So part of that work as a postdoctoral fellow with IC is connecting my research interest and practice to the philosophies and vision carried out by IC and its partners. For me, mapping my work around what I've called sonic life worlds to improvisational ways of sensing, knowing, and being in the world was not altogether a distant stretch. Simply put, my work in music education across spaces ranging from
traditional music classrooms to juvenile detention centers and family homeless shelters, invites young people to listen deeply to their world, exploring, excavating, and entertaining everyday sounds they encounter via group improvisation and collaborative composition. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll give you a definition of what sonic life worlds means. You can tap, yeah, there you go. That's a QR code. If you want to read about that's in my dissertation, you can do that. But basically, sonic life worlds, as I've defined it in my work, is everyday sound currents streaming in, out, through, across spaces and places traveled and trekked, such as schools, homes, neighborhoods, parks, playgrounds, streets, alleyways, train stations, and cyberspaces, basically anywhere. And I proposed a project, you can go to the next slide, in 2019, while I was still doing the PhD, improvising outside. There's a really beautiful sculpture percussion set in London, Ontario, and when I was riding my bike through the park, I'm like, that should be a project. So I partnered with the local middle school teacher, put together a team at Western, did something that we really don't do in music education, which is actually talk to the composers, talk to the performers, and try to de-silo that. That's a big part of my work as well, as de-siloing. But this work is really founded on the notion that collaborative listening and playing in outdoor spaces, this was 2019, how more important it is post-COVID, offers persons opportunities to recreate their sonic life world, their voices, their rhythms, etc., with more than human elements, wind, trees, birds, and the like, in order to draw attention to the unique ways we come to resonate with the world and the things around us. So these next few slides are to share some examples of how I've been able to marry my work, and grateful to be able to be in a space where I can marry my work and research with the tenets of critical studies and improvisation. So we can go to the next, yeah, that slide is perfect. And this was a recent project that we did that was sponsored by IC and Campus Friends in our new improv lab from February to April. My colleague Joe Subera, amazing percussionist and teacher in Guelph, we designed this program using AMI, which some of you may know about. It was designed by Pauline Oliveros and a whole bunch of other people. And there's a book that is out of this that you, I believe, are part of. And yeah. And Koala, which is an amazing $5 app that I found on, you can do it for Android or Apple. Yeah. But basically, you can sample any sound that you want, and you can perform this sound and use different effects and so forth. So these are students in Campus Friends. They are adults that have various intellectual and physical disabilities. They come to campus a few days a week to have a campus life experience. And this experience that we provided for them was called Sounds Like Us. I asked them to collect sounds from their everyday life, sounds that were interesting to them. And these sounds became the basis for group improvisation and collaborative composition. And if you hit the enter button, you can actually hear a piece. We can listen to it. It's a few minutes of the sounds that they collected, and a piece that, a collage, basically. So. Maybe if you push the play button, it might work. The one between Ami and Koala. If the you might want to back it up. Or not.
I like hearing the wind. Very good.
Woohoo! Woohoo!
I like hearing the wind.
I could just hear people like, you know,
Familiar
babbling
voices.
on, talking high, you know, probably saying like,
Familiar
how's your
voices.
class going, kind of thing. And then I hear like the acoustic going like, or something like that.
And the text tone, it sounds like doo-doo-doo.
With who?
I like how you say
Very good.
With who? With who?
I like hearing the wind. Familiar voices. Familiar voices. Like splashy. Splashy. Like splashy. Splashy.
My cat and cow and text tone are common sounds I hear every day. The text tone might make me feel happy because it means that my friend sent me a message. Typically, a custom text tone for it. And my cat and cow can just meow sometimes for no reason. It gets vocal. And the text tone, it sounds like doo-doo-doo.
Sonic Life
Sounds
rules.
from doo-doo. Back when cell phone would make that sound doo-doo, got cut offline. And my cat, he always meows like doo-doo-doo, this. Doo-doo-doo. And he just never stops sometimes. It's crazy. But the meowing might make me feel a little frustrated sometimes when he's meowing for whatever reason that I don't know. And the text tone makes me feel happy. I hear these sounds at home, and the text tone I usually hear when I'm out or anywhere, really, since it's on my cell phone.
What sounds do you hear? Do you hear the wind outside?
And how does the wind make you feel hearing it?
Happy?
Happy? You like the wind? You like when it's cold?
Yeah.
Yeah. And where are you when you hear this right now?
We're inside.
We're inside. So we hear it outside because the window's right next to us. Yeah. And how can you mimic or imitate the wind? Whoosh. Very good.
Silence.
Silence. Do you like the sound of silence?
Yeah.
What do you like about the sound of silence?
You just know you hear it.
Nice.
So I'm looking at my clock and I've got 19 seconds left, but 3 slides left. And I'm not going to go through 3 slides because I think this gives an idea of, at least in my mind, the importance and the significance of this genealogy moving forward to moving forward so that I have an opportunity to explore my research in new ways. And as we move within the rhythms and sounds and what Ajay called yesterday in that beautiful talk, the dance of uncertainty, we rely on aspects, I rely on aspects of improvisation to help realize and renew a commitment to creativity, curiosity, imagination, and care. Thank you.
That I would like to ask to maybe open up the spectrum. Tengo una pequeña pregunta para ellos para abrir aquí nuestro intercambio. Yo que been discussion in some of the earlier work roundtables about the titles that Benjamin chose, the deliberately openness of those titles. And I'm impressed by how much richness that has already brought out in everything that has happened until now. But so the title of this one, I think, was genealogies in plural. And there was something that Ajay said at the very beginning of his presentation that one of, as I understood it, one of the objectives of the early work that you guys were doing was to document. And as I understood the idea of documentation, understanding that what was being, the idea was to document critical studies, not necessarily to document improvisation per se. And that led me to wonder about whether the idea of documentation there, when I think of critical studies, I think of them as producing their own documents, most of which appear, or maybe less than we would like, appear in the journal. But so then if I think of starting with documentation, my first idea is there must already be some things to document when you're starting. So from the perspective of genealogies in plural, I would be interested to know, was there any documentation of critical studies before you guys started, or were there just no critical studies to document? And I'm going to quickly translate that because a lot of people don't seem to have a... Oh, okay, great. Perfect, then I'll shut up.
So just to be clear, when I talked about documentation at the outset of my little talk, it was about the exhibit that we did, which was meant to document the field over the 15-year period. So the exhibit itself, which we did last October, was an attempt to document the field. But the question you asked is an interesting one. Was there stuff going on that needed to be documented? And my experience, I'd be curious to hear what my colleagues think, but my sense is that when we started doing this work, we realized that there were people also doing similar work, but they weren't connected in any way. They were operating in distant locales, not, there was no network really. So part of that network formed through the conferences that we started doing, through the journal. But I think, part of the documentation piece, maybe in those early years, was about trying to understand who's out there, who's doing this work, and then how can we build the field. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things to know, I think, just to expand very quickly on what Ajay said, is that George Lewis had run a conference in San Diego, I think, where for the first time, people assembled, or second time, yeah, sorry, and that, I think Ajay was at that conference, and then the work that was going on at Guelph, there was a connection, but it was a piece of, but it was also a part of. And it was largely facilitated by the fact that we were in situ together, talking to each other, seeing each other daily, envisioning things. And that's what made it possible, as opposed to an ephemeral conference, that came and went on a few occasions. And between that conference and Derek Bailey's book on improvisation, that was about it at the time. So from 1990-ish to now, there's been an incredible explosion. of activity and work.
Sorry, pardon me. It is also worth saying that, of course, collectives of musicians all around the world have been doing this work through doing and documenting their practices for a long, long time. Yeah.
So would you see a balance? Because now we're talking about two different things. We're talking about academics who are focusing critically on improvisation, and we're talking about groups of musicians who are reflecting. I of all people am aware that those things overlap, but it would be nice to hear it said.
Yes, those things overlap. In fact, those things are so tightly braided in our conception of this field, making artistic expression and thinking about it, that we can't separate them. And when I think of almost everybody in the field who is writing from a musical standpoint, whether they have a university job and think in very exciting, abstruse ways, like David Borgo's work at UC San Diego, or whether they come from a musical kind of location and are practicing out in the world, they're makers. They're artists themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think that doing is a very important part of those insights. Is that true for you, Jashen? Your doing and thinking, are they braided in your own work?
Absolutely, which is why there was friction between me and the field of music education. I'm at Downey Music Education. It's a wonderful field, but I think that one of the things we struggled with in music education is a lot of theory tied to traditional practice, especially in the United States. So in California, you've got your bands, your orchestras, your choirs, and this is throughout the states, especially in the Big Ten states where you have the football games. Doing something like this. You really, that was new, and that's what drew me to going, to study, to pursue this sort of work. And I think the thinking on a personal level, and we talked about this last night a little bit when we were playing, because I just, I studied orchestral music, studied composition, it still is this thinking and doing with music is still a play that I dance with, because I start to think about the compositional aspects of things. But one of the things that I feel is that the concentration on the improvisatory aspects and seeing the improvisatory aspects of ways of sensing across senses, not just sound with music, but also the smell, the touch, which is what my study and research focuses on. It's not just collect some sounds and here make some music with it. It's what do you think about that? How do you feel about that? What's your first visceral reaction to that sound? Why? Because I know my first visceral reaction to certain sounds is boom, takes me back to South Central Los Angeles. So where I grew up, and those are sounds that I'm like, oh wow, yeah, those are not happy sounds. So thinking about, that kind of answers, I think. I'm not gonna go like that.
Realmente es un poco continuar en lo que...
I think it's continuing because all of what we were talking about, Daniel, you were talking at some point, if I understood correctly, that in the process of institutionalizing these studies, these critical studies of improvisation, you tried to blur the frontiers between institution, scholarly, and you've been talking about this, but I would like to go deeper. How do you resolve this? Because many of those who are here, we are scholars, but also improvisers, but also researchers, and we have not always found the channel within the institutions. Maybe Benjamin might find a different channel here in Mexico, and I say this very seriously, to find a way, as you said, that frontiers do not be so strict. Justo es una buena pregunta, ¿no? Cuando hablamos de
The image I use is the stream the river just down the street. You're standing by it, and there's some garbage, and there's a rock, and there's a tree, and there's an animal. And here we all are, and we reach in and we pull out some water, and we bring it to our lips, or we throw it or put it on our face or whatever. And all the time that we're doing that, the water keeps flowing. And we can go down the stream and do that again. What that means for me is that that is a way of envisioning what improvisation is. You're in the moment, you're grabbing something. How does that relate to erasing the or playing with the boundaries, the institutional ways in which we think about things? Well, you begin to understand that any action, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's as an academic, whether it's as an artist, can be thought of in all those terms simultaneously. And then you try to put that into practice. So it's not something that we knew when we started. It's something that we learned as we went. So for example, the course that I teach in the Critical Studies and Improvisation graduate program started out very, academic, 2 terms, you're reading this, you're reading that, we're going to have a paper, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. Now it is, I sit down with the students and I say, we can do that, but what would you be interested in doing? And how about if we improvise what this class is going to do together for the next year? Not only that, but the course started as a conventional academic course, and I eventually quickly realized that we're talking about practice all the time. It would be ridiculous in this course not to have an outcome that is practice as well. So the outcome of all these courses now is public-facing performances, installation, as it is in Ajay's class. And we tell our students, when you're performing, you are investigating, you are studying, right? When you're performing, a performance can be a chance for pedagogy between the players, between the audience and the players, a self-reflection, right? At the same time as you are engaging in artistic practice that's coming out of a formation, a genealogy, multiple things simultaneously embodied in that moment of performing. And an academic lecture can be a performance, right? And it can be a moment of self-reflection. It can be in dialogue with. So now, anytime I look at, so for example, my course is titled Core Concepts. Now I say it's core concepts, but what were we doing here? We're starting the course by instituting a canon that has not even listened to the people who are in the process of making the canon. What the hell are we doing here? So we say, okay, it's core concept, under erasure, as we say, right? So core concepts under erasure. So what are your concepts that we want to, and that's how the dialogue then evolves. I don't know, Ajay, or?
But I want to take your course.
Hi, thanks very much for all this knowledge and experiences that you're very kindly sharing. Well, I have a little comment and 2 questions. I don't know, maybe you are familiar with the sociologist Catherine Walsh, that she has worked with indigenous peoples in South America. She developed this concept of critical intercultural relations, which is precisely this, improvising every day our lives based on love and creative ideas and values that enrich mutually ourselves in these relations, and I just, this brought me to think that improvising is precisely that, the art of improvising with love and richness, every moment that we're living and giving and receiving humbly, and that humanizes us. So that relates to the this help for the kids, the children that you were talking, Ellen, and this uplifting that we can do every day around us, right? By sharing and improvising with what we feel and our cultural values and have this critical intercultural relation all the time. Well, and my first question is, could you share some experience that you have had where the audience also participates in the improvisation as one of the possibilities of when this happens? How you, I don't know, how do you invite people to do it, or it just happens, or some experiences about that? And my third question and last question is, I know you, Daniel, founded this band that you have, Vertical Squirrels, or
Nobody founded it. The band that you'll hear tomorrow came as a result when Ajay had a health event in 2008. A group of friends just said, let's get Ajay back to playing some music. And we just sat in his living room and played music, not thinking we would ever become anything. So,
the name of Vertical Squirrels, how is it related to improvisation? What's the because I guess the spirit somehow is related to this concept. I don't know.
I'll let Daniel answer the vertical squirrels question, because it's a mystery to all of us, I think. But the question about whether, examples of moments where we've invited our audiences to improvise with us, we have certainly tried to do that on a number of occasions. I'm trying to think of it seems to me that over the years at the Jazz Festival, we've done various things. For example, in workshops where we've invited people in the audience to join in. But the kind of more interesting example might be at one year we had Jane Bennett, who is a very well-known improviser, flautist, soprano saxophonist in Toronto, as our inaugural improviser in residence. So this is a program that we run in partnership with the Musicetti's Foundation, and this was the inaugural iteration of that program. And Jane Bennett would come to Guelph more or less once a week for a few days a week. She lived in Toronto. And one of the things we had her do was walk into public places like libraries. And she improvised, but she handed out instruments to people in the space to improvise with her. And it was particularly interesting to do it, at a busy time at the University of Guelph Library. It was, I think, quite a stress release for people at that time of year to be able to, participate in that. So yeah, we have had various occasions where we've invited our audiences to join in. That's just one example.
We also very early on developed a project called Play Who You Are with an organization called Abilities First in Guelph. Kids Ability, I mixed it up with the Pauline Olivosa. Kids Ability provides programming for kids with disabilities. And basically, if the kid wants to play basketball, they'll figure out a way for the kid to play basketball. And I vividly remember the meeting where we met in a coffee shop with the director, and we were all very nervous because none of us had done any work with this in this space. And we were all like, oh, will we break them? Will it be okay? We don't want to make them perform or anything. We wanted to have a kind of summer camp. And the woman just said, get over yourselves, just come on and get to work. And so we did, with some terrific people and some wonderful artists like Nathaniel Roberts, who came and figured out how to improvise with these kids. And it speaks to your question, because the kids were not an audience that we were presenting things to, or a bunch of students that we were teaching how to. The kids were collaborators who were teaching us how to work according to a lot of different ways of cognitive processing and embodiment, different bodily and sensory modalities. And when we got to the Guelph Jazz Festival Saturday afternoon public square concert, and we got all the kids up on the stage, and they were all seated and they were going to do their thing, and the monitors were all across the stage, the parents came up and they said, are you crazy? Our kids are on this stage and they're the stars and we can't see them because the monitors are in the way. So the parents became our teachers. And we, of course, rearranged everything so that it could be proper. My point is that we're constantly engaging in ways that are trying to teach us how to improvise our ideals. And this is the critical study in improvisation for me, is that we are in practice, through practice, critiquing our social values, putting them to the test with different people, not on or to, but with different people. Yeah. So I know the vertical squirrels question. I have nothing to say about the vertical squirrel.
It's a very interesting, again, going back to this idea of genealogy and lineage, because Kids' Ability, which I was not around for, and the Play Like Us, which I was not around for, in the 18, yeah, 18 years old. And the question then becomes, what happens at when you're 19 and 20 and 21? And so what you saw on the slide that I shared, Campus Friends, was a natural extension of Kids' Ability. And in that, you mentioned that there was joy that you sensed in the sound. The performance was a performance, and it was a struggle to think about. With Joe and I battled over this for a bit and ourselves about, do we want to have a performance or just like a showcase, or is it going to be the same things sort of building upon each week, because we had 6 weeks? And they wanted to perform. They were and they performed, and they lit the stage, and their families were lit in a good way, and then really, happy about what was happening. And they created the improvisatory dances, the improvisation music, that koala thing I showed you with the where they could record the sounds. That we had iPads set up so that they could then beat make and play along. And when they heard their sound being played that they had sent to me through Flipgrid before, had all of that lined up and gridded to koalas so that they could like pick their sounds and play. It was all an experience that would not have happened probably if Kids' Ability hadn't happened, wouldn't have happened if the jazz festival hadn't happened, if the colloquium had it. There's this lineage that is very clear to me. And it's interesting you mentioned the pedagogical aspects earlier in the book, because improvisation is pedagogy. I mean, it is, you are there to improvise with others and create. You got a curriculum, but who cares? It's like who's in front of you. And then that becomes the curriculum, and what you have is a base of your model of curriculum activity gets to expand and learn, because it's activity, reflection, activity. It's a basic Freirean concept, action, reflection, action.
Yeah, and just echoing that, I mean, I think that one of the words we haven't said much about is agency. And, improvisation is about creating agents, not subjects. Right? Systems love producing subjects that serve the machine, right? And I think we very consciously, in so much of the work, have tried to create people and have tried to empower agency. And in order to do that, you always have to understand that your own agency is limited, and humbly be ready to learn from others who are have agency in a different way. So it's also about the dialogue with difference, and how we negotiate difference and learn from it. And that's one of the reasons why, despite all the criticisms about the utopian nature of this kind of a project, and it's naive, thinking about, and these are words that have been used about us. There's a profound truth in the uplift that occurs when people find their agency, and then find the agency that feeds into a community, and that community finds its agency, and world making then happens, right? There is no answer.
Oh. Yo tengo una consulta breve. Sí.
Okay. Tengo una cosa que añadir a la pregunta ya hecha. mencionar en Francia hay tres hermanos, los hermanos Charles. Uno es Xavier, que es musicólogo.
But since many decades ago, he's also a professional improviser and a clarinetist, Xavier. Then we have Laurent Chal, who is a saxophonist and also an improviser. And then we have Paris, who is a trombone player, and he has made a big collection of wind instruments, or metal instruments, playable. Sometimes and he organizes something that it's called La Fanfare de la Tour. And in my own experience with La Fanfare de la Tour, it was in the marriage of one of my friends. She's a dancer and also an improviser in Toulouse, where she brought together all the attendees of the wedding, and each of them was supposed to take one of the instruments, and we made a parade playing the instruments they gave, and they played the instrument as the best they could, and it was all agency. Yes, I have the microphone. I'm going to try to be brief. No, I was interested. There is something interesting. Sorry, when you are beyond the experience by starting a field of investigation. Victoria is telling me to speak slower. And there's something that I like because the system of research in Argentina is tyrannical, and with a small anecdote and how artists deal with the research. We went to a place with a transdisciplinary that in order to explain their work would make a performance, and there we were, the artists reading our works in a very serious way, just to be at the level of the rest of the researchers and the rest of the field of research. And it was interesting because while we were there, when we are studying this field, from a past university, from an institute, from independent areas, we can revise the methodologies that we're going to use, because institution per se cannot take the topic and just put it in a cage. There are not quantitative or qualitative methodologies. It's more like performatic possibilities. So I liked the mention to the classes of Ajay, but I'm coming to the question. Yeah, I'm trying my best not to rush myself, but the question is, what kind of work you do at from a methodological standpoint. And then you mentioned this as a practice that it's put into practice, a practice that doesn't look forward to repetition, but looks forward to encounter, to find out what's the link between practice and the bodies. So that's the question, and I celebrate that we can open this field more and more, and well, that's it.
And you will have a different answer than I will. So I want you to take this away because you've done all this work in the grad program. But first, I want you to know that we fight this battle in Canada too. You know, our granting council recognizes artistic research, which they call research creation. But sometimes it's a long time to explain to your colleagues in sociology or anthropology or the social sciences that this proposition that you actually can produce knowledge through making art. So I've spent a great deal of time in the last few years developing and codifying a methodology that I'm calling community engaged research creation, and that involves elements of other well-known things, participant action research from sociology, or ethnomusicological, ethnographic methodologies. And then also methodologies that I'm learning from my Indigenous colleagues that have to do with things like gathering, consulting elders, eating together, having like these are all things we do, right? but really sort of thinking about how do you engage everybody who's involved in the research process as researchers according to their desires and their limitations, because not everybody wants to be involved in the same way. How do you make a space where, as the paid academic, I give up some power and put the chairs out and make the food and provide the money and pay the people who aren't employed, so that we can all have a space where there really is an option of a true improvisational process. So to explain these things, to make them intelligible to our institutions and funders, this is an ongoing process. Yeah.
I'll just very quickly say that all our students in our program, if they come in as creators, can actually produce a creative thesis, a dissertation that is a work of music, an installation, an art piece, a design. So long as there's some language that goes with it, like a framework. There's a program at our university where they have similar values, but their students, in order to do that, have to get the approval of the vice president of research. We do not have to do that. And it was a huge victory to have that happen. And I'm seeing the benefits of that in terms of inviting in those outliers who find a home and can't believe that they found a home, right?
I don't really have much to add. I think Alan and Daniel have covered it.
So I've been asked to speak in English. I wanted to speak Spanish for this question, but Gonzalo, I think we pretty much solved that problem. I mean, the problems are quite similar in Canada and here and elsewhere. We can talk about the details, but what I wanted to ask you is about the development of participating publics and readers and people involved, because I can think of ways in which we involve others and the growth of those publics is sort of proportional to what we do. And then sometimes it's disproportional, so that we get, a sort of a bonus type effect. And I wanted to ask you what ways you have found to involve people which are the most effective and most sort of bonus bringing.
Thank you for that question. It's something I've thought a lot about, particularly in my days running the Guelph Jazz Festival. And I think that maybe the most important thing that we did over the years that helped to build that public and that level of public interest was the colloquium that we ran. So this really was the only regular academic conference that was being put on as part of the Jazz Festival. And it took off, as I said earlier, it took off very quickly. People who were just there to attend the festival to hear the music would come to the sessions. And so, in some ways, this was meant to be kind of an audience building strategy for the festival, that in some other contexts, the music that they might come and listen to would be challenging or off-putting, too experimental. But when they were able to hear artists speak about their work in a kind of intimate setting, suddenly it made sense to them in a way that maybe it wouldn't have if they didn't have that opportunity to have that, kind of face-to-face contact with the artist. So I think the, started out as an audience building strategy for the festival, but in fact, I think it has played much the same role in building the field and building the public for the field. So that's one piece I would mention.
Yeah, I would add that, again, unintended consequences. About 10 years ago, actually 10 years ago last month, in Guelph, we created a DIY space that is called silence. And it is a space that it would not have been thinkable without the work that had happened in the Jazz Festival and the Colloquium, the building of the community. And now we have in our little town, besides the Institute and all the other activities that you've heard about, we have a free space, not with virtually no government support, that's DIY, that's hosting community events and musicians, over 200 events a year in the space, to give you some sense of the amplitude of it, and an audience that's building, all an unintended consequence of the work that came out of the academy. And that's one of the things we tell our students, is that we want them to not think about themselves as academics. We want to think of themselves as members of a community, and that their work matters to that community, and that's a question they have to keep asking themselves in the work that they do, and that's a prime methodological problem that they have as students in terms of translating their work in front of a public, right from the very first year that they're in the program.
Hola, hello. Creo que yo sí hablaré en español.
I just wanted to say that all the work that you've done so far has been quite inspiring, or at least for me, it's quite inspiring. I've been reading the journal, reading the books that you have published. I think this is a very rich material, and I think that we need to make a translation work in order to keep widening the reach of the field, and not just between English and Spanish or Spanish and English. But anyways, regarding this, I just wanted to point out, because of the question that Franco was, or Gonzalo, I don't know who made the question, but in the book, in the reading of spontaneous acts that you edited, Ajay or Ajay, there is an interesting combination between texts, academic texts, so to speak, also classical texts of artists, and then some pages that are more drawings or more graphic expressions, and I think that captures how can we show the character of the performance, that the reading of that book is performative, because you are hopping between different types of discourse. You're leaping among different types of discourse, and of course there's also a thought behind those kinds of creation. I wanted to ask you, the four of you, or if you can speak a little bit more about the improv lab that you founded not so long ago. I was particularly interested in knowing what kind of practices you conduct, what kind of practices that allowed us to have a space as this one, with all the technology that it involves, and also thinking beyond the people who come from the musical field, people like Kimber Sider. I mean, she came from, she's a filmmaker. Like, what do you do on an improv lab, and how that can give power to people who are not necessarily musicians?
And thank you also for the comments about the improvisation studies reader, Spontaneous Acts, which I co-edited with Rebecca Kane, who I guess is speaking tomorrow. That was a very deliberate move on our part to when we were conceptualizing that book, to have those multiple voices, as part of it. In terms of Improv Lab, we've only been open for about a year. So we're still in our infancy, really, and we're still sorting out the details of how the space is going to be used. We wrote a grant for that space in 2016, and we only were given occupancy about a year ago. So it's been a long struggle to get the space, but it is outfitted with technology that would allow us to engage in telematic performances. It's something that Benjamin and I had talked about maybe trying to do with you here in Mexico, in fact. So maybe that's something we can do in the future. So telematic performances involve real-time music making across geographical distance. But, we've done a number of things in the space. I think Jashen mentioned the Campus Friends project. That was one example. Rebecca Barnstaple, who was supposed to be here with us this week, is a dancer and a movement artist. She held a residency in the space. I think Jashen participated in that. So we have done things that have involved things that go beyond music. We've done a screening of the Pauline Oliveros documentary, which Anna and the team at Musigettes helped to facilitate. And then a talk back with the director and Ione, Pauline's life partner. So yeah, we've done a number of things in the space, but it feels that we are still very much in our infancy. We're just sorting out. It is meant to be first and foremost a research space. It's funded by the Canada Foundation for Innovation. So it is meant to be a research space. And we are getting lots of requests now because it's a beautiful space. And people are coming to us saying, oh, we'd like to do such and such. And of course, we want the public to use the space, but we also have to be aware that under the guidelines that provided the funding for the space, it is meant to be a research space. And there's a team of us who are named, including us, who are named on that grant to be able to utilize the space for our research. So that is the primary function. Yeah.
Also, several pints of Ajay's blood went into that space, I am certain. I mean, this is the worst grant in the universe, this Canada Foundation for Innovation Infrastructure grant. It is, to take it on is to commit to more than your pound of flesh being put into it. Yeah. And maybe I can just also add, I bet you're doing things with very minimal resources that are connecting people together, right? I just did a project over Zoom in 2021, as we all did, where orchestra musicians improvised with adults with disabilities and special music educators for 8 weeks. And the only technology we had was some, microphones to go along with the computers that we spread around. And so, we're all doing this work with whatever technologies we have.
Yeah, I would only add that I hope you're getting a sense of a kind of emergent ecosystem. And we don't have all the answers. We don't know how it all works. We just do it and then see what happens. And we problem solve along the way. There are already battles that I've seen go on about use of the space and territoriality expressed and then, relationship to community that's constrained by the terms of the grant, which are idiotic to begin with, etc. So it's, and every element that we've discussed has had those kinds of struggles. So when I think about that, it's very moving for me because I have so much respect for people who have made the kinds of sacrifices that everybody around here, around this table has made to see this through, not for any glory or anything, just because it was the right thing to do. And a very improbable thing to do. Yeah.
In fact, I learned recently that 0.001% of that funding body's money has ever gone to an arts project. Yeah. This is
One interesting thing to add, though, about that is that we invited the vice president of that funding agency to our launch. And I've been told by the research office at our institution that as a result of him visiting, they are now increasing the envelope of funding that will be dedicated to the arts.
I will believe it when I see it.
Thank you very much. Y muchísimas gracias por venir. Hay ahora, dentro de muy poco, un concierto.
By a panic moment while the second group prepares, and then another concert. So take the time to drink a coffee, have a chat, and we'll be back in some moments.